Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions. Of podcast, I have an amazing guest to introduce you today, and we're actually going to talk about a topic that I don't think we've ever covered in 421 episodes of this podcast. We're going to cover a topic I don't think we have ever covered, and I would love to welcome Gloria CHOU to the podcast. Welcome, Gloria.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. As you said, after almost 500 episodes, there's not a single person talking about this, so I cannot wait.
You are the person to talk to this about, and you run your own firm called Gloria CHOU PR. And before we get into what that means and what you do and how you do it and why that matters to e-commerce brands, why don't you tell me how you even came to be in the space? You're based in New York, but what drew you into the space? What interested you about it, and why now, and why how, and why this way?
Ooh, so if anyone is looking for a drastic career change, this episode is for them. So I actually never worked a day in my life in any PR or marketing agency. So my approach is very unconventional and very untraditional. I actually used to be a US diplomat. So I worked in the government, completely different. And while it was a very comfortable life, I had really great job security. I think I was just born to be an entrepreneur, honestly. And I just love to be everyone's hype woman. Like, I just love to connect people and see people win. And so PR naturally for me, because I was a really good communicator, I was writing speeches for the ambassador, I wanted to get a job in PR. But I kid you not, I applied for over 1,000 jobs in PR and no firm would hire me because they all wanted very cookie cutter agency experience. And so I said, there's no way that this is that hard. Like, why is this so impenetrable? So I got this random gig from a friend who was working for a tiny startup, like barely funded. It was like him, 2 engineers, and the founders. And they did this really complex AI fintech thing. I had no idea what any of that was. And they're like, if you can get us on TV and CNBC and Wall Street Journal, like, we'll pay you a couple $100. And so I literally sat with the engineers, looking at spreadsheets, trying to figure out what is the story that I can pitch. And because I never had any media contacts, I had to Google the newsroom at New York Times and Wall Street Journal. And I had to pick up the phone with sweaty hands and cold pitch to the operator until they would pass me on. And so I think from thousands of times being rejected, I started to recognize patterns on when that cold pitch would be yes. And so now I teach that framework. It's called my CPR pitching framework to founders across the world. And I really love working with product because traditionally we're told what? Ads, social media, pay to play. No one's really helping product owners leverage media. And so I'm really about disrupting the model of what PR agencies are, which is privilege and access, and making that visibility truly accessible for the everyday small business owner.
That is a handful to try to take in and absorb from my side, but it is very exciting. And I think you hit on a key point here, which is that especially for startup brands, I think that it's almost a foregone conclusion. They've resigned themselves to the fact that they're going to have a pretty big budget. They're probably going to have to spend $100,000 on Meta, Google, Amazon ads, influencers, pay to play, performance marketing, etc. They have this sense that it is almost futile as a startup unless they've got deep pockets or unless they are operating in a super narrow niche where they've already got an audience or a community behind them. They feel like it's a foregone conclusion that they can't win against the big guys and girls of their industries. And basically, it sounds like from what you're saying, that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, I actually sat in on a few webinars because I'm also a startup coach, and I had the other mentors be like, what you're doing is truly revolutionary, because one of the things I always tell my startups is don't spend money on PR because it's so expensive. In New York City, retainers start anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, and they don't allow you to sign anything less than 6 months usually. So you're locked in at $60,000. And for most e-commerce owners, that is just not feasible. And so I think there's 95% of this market that's not being served because the old industry is telling you need to pay someone with access. And so because I've hacked it on the outside and cold pitched, I realized journalists don't want to talk to PR reps. They really don't. They want to talk to everyday indie brands, and they want to talk to the founder. And so why don't we just remove that middle layer, that middleman? But as long as you, like the small business owner, can understand that you are your best advocate. And yes, it's going to take some time, but it's probably the most meaningful and high ROI leverage work that you can do. you start seeing crazy results. It's just, would I rather spend 60 hours creating 1 or 2 or 5 reels that maybe go viral, and out of that, maybe 2 customers will buy? Or would I rather get on Oprah's favorite things and use that to not leverage sales, but also it's going to give me SEO backlinks. I can convert that into a blog. I can repurpose it to social media. So it's really about working harder and not smarter, but there's a lot of mindset pivots that a small business owner has to make before they do this. And hopefully at the end of this episode, we'll give you some actionable strategies that you can actually make this work for yourself.
And do you now, at this point of this whole entrepreneurial journey of your own, do you consider yourself a PR lady in your own right, or a PR firm in your own right, or a PR agency in your own right? Or do you think of yourself more now as a coach, a guide, a mentor, a trainer, a teacher? Do you teach brands how to do this on their own, independently of you? Or is it a done for you service that you say, hey, look, similar to how you did with those first founders that you worked with, I'm going to come in, I'm going to learn all about your brand, I'm going to learn all about your business, and then I'm going to do the outreach on your behalf, or I'm going to teach you how to do your own outreach on your own behalf. So how do you classify yourself today after that first, I guess, epiphany moment that you had?
So I love shattering the status quo. I will say I've never had an agency, and I don't really do done for you. I do the pitch writing. So I do have a group program where, because really it's simple. PR is just knowing how to write a pitch and knowing who to send it to. And if you have a database of contacts, and if you have a proven framework of how to write a pitch, you put the 2 and 2 together and you implement it as a repeatable system. So that's what I do. I really call myself a coach, and not someone that's doing done for you. And here's the thing. If the agency's doing that for you, the moment you stop paying them, they walk away with the relationships. And so I had a lot of people come to me after they spend $20,000, $30,000 with an agency and saying, like, I just didn't have time. And so I just threw money at the problem, but they weren't getting me things that really resonated with me and my story. And now I'm willing to take this in-house. So I'm not saying that you should never hire an agency, but I think unless you learn what your message is, how can you convert your salesy pitch into a relevant news trend, which is leading not with the benefits and features, but leading with insights and solutions, you will never be able to get off this hamster wheel. So it's really about learning your message, honing in on the message, and owning those contacts so that you can start to connect with journalists without having to pay someone or go through a third-party intermediary.
So in other words, stop using gatekeepers, I guess, if I had to boil that down in a nutshell.
Yeah. And look, if you're a startup and you have millions of dollars, right? Sure, hire an agency, fine. But the most successful founders have a hybrid where maybe they do delegate certain projects outside, but they have an in-house person doing all of the planting of the seeds. Because in order to get volume, and there's so many buckets of visibility, right? There's like speaking, there's awards, there's panels, there's podcasts, anything that has to do with outreach, you are very capped when you work with an outsider because they're only going to give you 2 or 5 hours or whatever is on their retainer. But if you learn how to actually do this, then you can hire someone on the inside for not very much money. It could be an intern or an assistant to just replicate that process. And so that's really what I teach people to do. So I'm not saying that you should never hire an agency, but I'm saying unless you're making like $1 million a year or more, if you're a startup that have 10 $1 million and you're trying to exit, it's just not feasible for most businesses.
And how do you, for your business, because presumably you had to put yourself out there, you had to build your personal brand, you had to get on founders' radar, you had to build this from scratch yourself, similar to how I have as a consultant. I've had to build up my personal brand, got 33,000 followers on LinkedIn, I've got a podcast, I've got all these things. And I started personally building an audience almost 10 years before I ever even remotely thought about needing to monetize them or wanting to monetize them or anything like that. It was basically like, listen to Gary Vee. And it was like, I got sick of him telling me, if you want to be a thought leader, put your thoughts out there and let the market decide. So I was like, okay, Gary, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to start creating. And for me, first and foremost, creating content that I enjoy, that I love putting out, and we'll just see what good things might come from this. Now, 10 years down the track, the amount of good things that have come out of this has been almost innumerable. I can't even count, not just direct business from it, but relationships and partnerships and speaking opportunities and free places to stay when I travel all around the world from all the friends I've met. And there's just so many good things that come out of building a personal brand. But for you, did you hack the system for yourself too and say, look, I'm going to eat my own dog food and I'm going to build my own personal brand in the same way that I'm going to help these startups build their brand?
I think there's a couple of things here and it's very complex, right? So I think obviously building a personal brand is something we all need to do. And it's like pulling teeth. In the beginning, I started this business during COVID. I had no clue what a webinar was, what a funnel was. And so all of a sudden it was like, okay, how do I actually get more leads? Because I was transitioning from a consultant model to a one-to-many model. So that was painstaking. I remember that IKEA desk that I built my business on, like ugly cries every night, trying to figure out how to plug this API. And it was a whole mess. Right now I have a team to do that. But I think that when you have something that is truly different, that's, I wouldn't want to say like revolutionary, but no one's really doing PR like this. And if you
Blue
can
ocean,
show that,
right?
yeah, if you're, so because no one's really doing PR this way, and because again, I had to fail 1,000 times to come up with my CPR pitching method, because again, I had no contacts, people pick up on that. And so I don't necessarily need the most visually aesthetically pleasing branding, because there's no one else doing this. Now, if you're doing something that's very saturated that maybe other people are doing, then like you need to play that volume content game for sure, because there's a lot of consultancy. So I think it goes hand in hand. I just think when I started, no one was doing this. I had no clue what I was doing. And so how I actually hacked my audience was not really through Instagram, was offering free masterclasses and workshops to all of these female founded places on Zoom. So it was like, here's my method, here's how you do it, and just sharing all of the secret sauce. A lot of times they say, don't reveal all of your secret sauce, or show them the what, not the how. And I was like revealing everything. I'm like, this is exactly the pitch that I wrote, and this is how you can actually do it on your own. And I think that actually helps you in the beginning. And I actually don't agree in this scarcity mindset of like, you need to hide, but so I think in the beginning, it's like giving so much value and making people fundamentally change the way they think about PR. That has really helped me be a thought leader in this field. But yeah, it's hard. It's an echo chamber out there, right? To build an audience. I always say, unless you started on LinkedIn or blogs or Instagram, I don't know, at least 7 years ago, it's really hard now. Yeah. Because it's just so saturated. And so you really have to be in your lane and be really known for getting repeatable results for something. And I think a lot of times when you start businesses, you think, oh, I'm going to be a McDonald's. Every single person that walks in, I'm going to need to serve them. And that's just like the quickest way to fail. And as the riches are in the niches. And I've actually, throughout the course of my business, I'm actually niching down even more. I used to serve fitness coaches, authors, any kind of entrepreneur, both service-based and product-based. And now I am like 100% all in on product-based owners, because it's all about doing things 10 times better, but doing less things. So if I can just focus on this one sector of an audience, but deliver like crazy results, that's what I'm going to do all day.
Love it. I started out very similar to you. When I first started out, I catered to almost any merchant that wanted to do e-commerce better. And then over the last couple of years, I've just niched down further and further and further, and with a total laser focus on the B2B world. And man, I tell you, a lot of people think if I niche down, then by definition, I'm reducing the TAM that I can service, right? My total addressable market, I'm shrinking that. So I'm actually reducing opportunity. But as you say, if you can go deep instead of wide, oftentimes you'll have more impact in that one niche. And sure, maybe you can do a little bit of land and expand. Like when I first started out, I was only working with merchants, and now over the last couple of years, I've expanded into adjacencies, but still focused on B2B, but working with agencies, working with platform vendors, working with investors, but all focused on that B2B e-commerce space. And I tell you, that niching down has definitely not reduced my TAM. It's actually expanded it, because you can then become known, really hyper well known in that one tight little niche, to where when somebody thinks of that, they literally only think of you, because you're the only name that springs to mind around that tight little niche.
And the beautiful thing about it is that you still get other adjacent people coming in. And so it's not like we're closing the gates, but we're leading with that one specific thing. I read this book, I don't know but 10x is easier than 2x. Yeah. And so I'm like, after I read that book, I'm like, oh my God, this is really what it is. And I think at the time of reading this, at the time of recording, there's so much market saturation. Anyone can be on TikTok and influence. I really think the way to beat out the market is like doing less, but a lot better.
And when you take on a new client, do you start with basically like a discovery session or a questionnaire where you put them through a questionnaire, or do you effectively have a worksheet or a workbook or some kind of collateral that you give to them that you say, hey, here's all the collateral, here's all the contacts, you go and do it yourself? So what does your process look like as you start to work with these product companies? I'm guessing a lot of product companies are e-commerce based businesses or omni-channel businesses that maybe do physical retail and online. Where do you start when you take on a new client and you're starting from scratch? You know nothing about them. How do you get to know them and the way in which your framework will work for them?
Yeah, I always say no one wants another goddamn course. I don't know if I can curse on your show,
No, you
but I really think we're just zoomed out. People do not want to be sent to a Kajabi portal. And I actually have this tagline like, no one wants another damn course. And so for me, it's really about telling people exactly what to do. Most of my people are busy moms, women of color, who are juggling many different things. So they just want to be told what to do. And so for me, it's if you make a physical product, is it going to be about gift guides? So right now, as the time of recording, it is Q4, arguably the time where there are more PR articles written than any other time about gift guides. And so my focus right now this season is helping my members get onto the appropriate gift guides. So if you have more than one product, how do you know which one to pitch? How do you know which magazine to pitch? How do you know when it's too late? So all of the nooks and crannies of getting into a place like Oprah's Favorite Things or a digital thing like a wire cutter, that's going to be how I'm helping them. And so yes, it's helping them with the strategy using the CPR method. I have 50 plus proven templates where it's Mad Lib style, where they can actually just fill in the blanks for the pitch down to the subject line. That's how you structure the email, right? I give them tools about monitoring the email and follow-up etiquette. And then they go into the database that I created of exactly the journalists covering their niche. And here's another tip for your audience. A lot of people think, oh, if I want to be on, let's say, TechCrunch, I'm going to email info@TechCrunch or media at. And that is absolutely not right. Like you need to figure out what is the journalist that's covering your beat. So is it consumer electronics? Is it home and garden? Is it beauty and fitness? And so if you have that granular information, you're able to connect with anyone. And it's not a lot, it's maybe a couple hundred journalists. But if you know all of the people who are covering your product, that is your focus. And you have to be just fanatical about connecting with those journalists, because if you can just get onto one feature, then it just starts to domino effect. Actually, one of the things I love to tell my students is put it in the subject line, featured in Forbes, featured in Cosmo, because that gets them to look.
Mm-hmm. They get FOMO, right? Fear of missing out on their own right.
Yeah.
And how do you charge for your services? Like, how do you make money? So is it a subscription service? Is it hey, I'm going to give you these templates and you buy the templates? Or how do you make your money as effectively a coach or a guide or a mentor in these scenarios?
And I actually forgot to tell you that it's really not just about the contacts and writing. It's all about supporting them too. So we have a Facebook community where they can ask me questions 24/7, and we get on calls twice a month. And some of those calls are with actual journalists who write gift guides. So I had someone from BuzzFeed who writes gift guides, and she already covered 4 of our members. So it's really about bringing the media to small businesses who otherwise would have no clue how to be in front of them. And so that's really important. Like the access to me is really important. So we have a program that is literally a fraction of what it would cost to hire any marketing or PR agency or any social media person, but you unlock a database of 100,000 journalists across 100 plus categories, and you get me as your coach 24/7. And you get to meet other journalists too. So it's a little bit of pitch writing, right? Learning how to become a better writer, but then also increasing your network by meeting those journalists, and then having those seasonal strategies of, okay, maybe it's Valentine's Day and it's time to pitch for Valentine's Day versus Q4. So all of that inclusive right now, it's under 2,000. Like that's it. And there's no retainers, just one-time payment.
Is that 2,000 a month, or is that just
no? That's it. Total flat fee, because my people are mainly women of color who come from historically economic disenfranchised backgrounds. So accessibility is very important to me. Now, obviously, you can upgrade to work with me one-on-one to see the pitch being written, but I'm like in the Facebook group every single day, like answering people's questions, connecting with people. So for me, it's really about community. Like I'm not trying to build this huge thing. I remember every single person's name and their business. And it's really important for me because that really fills my cup. And anytime anyone comes through New York, I go grab coffee with them. The other day I hosted someone on my terrace. So having this community of women founders probably is like the biggest byproduct, the biggest benefit of all of this for me.
Wow. And do you foresee, or maybe you do already, and maybe I just don't know about it, do you run like events where maybe it'll be maybe you'll go and you'll hire out a conference room at a hotel or something like that, and you run PR events where you run from the stage and you get people that are specialists in the space and they come and they speak and they add to your content? And are you a fan of the event model as part of your business model as well?
Events are where it's at because I do love the in-person, but I live in New York City. So there's a lot of constraints with how much things cost. And so I tend to do smaller events. So I do host people on my terrace, for example, and that's mainly free. I get wine and I get food catered by female founded restaurants. So it's really back to the community. But I once in a while I will do workshops, whether it's virtually or in person. But I will say that's not like the majority of what I do. That's an add-on. I am doing starting this year to do small high-level retreats for maybe like 10 or so women, but I don't really have a big interest in doing like a huge event. To me, it's really important to be able to connect and be present with people instead of being in a room with like hundreds of other people.
Makes complete sense. And does the industry hate you? Because it feels like almost like you're revealing the secrets, the behind the scenes, you're pulling back the curtain, you're the traditional PR firm, the person that works in media, etc. It feels like you're like revealing the secrets, the behind the scenes, and giving insider access to what historically has been a very gate-kept industry where it was like, okay, I know this person and therefore I have access to them. I've got their email address. I've got their cell phone. I've got them on text. I've got them on WeChat. I've got them on WhatsApp, whatever. And therefore I'm going to charge you a premium for access via me. I'm the pipeline. I'm the conduit. And I'm going to be the gatekeeper that stands in between. I'm going to charge you for access to my network of contacts, my network of industry friends. And it feels like you set out either intentionally or unintentionally to completely disrupt that model. And has that created a lot of enemies for you in the industry?
Actually, none, because I actually have publicists who join my program to get better results for their clients. Because a lot of times when you work in PR, like they're not really teaching you a skill. They're just like, here are the contacts of the founders. So it's funny how like publicists actually join my program so that they can learn, even though they're employed by an agency. But I will say that I haven't had any enemies because what they're charging is 10, 20 times more than me that they're not even going after. We're not even going after the same people, right? So if you think about in New York, it's 5 to 10 grand per month per retainer. That's a 60 grand contract. My thing is under 2,000. So it's a completely different, it's just
different
a
business
different
model,
audience.
different
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. And they're not going to work with a small business anyways, like unless they can afford that. So I feel like there's such a big gap and there's really no one filling it.
So your ICPs are completely different. And so they don't necessarily see you as competition in any way because you work in a different space.
Exactly.
And what do you see as like the next big thing? So I know you talk a lot about gift guides and getting onto gift guides if you're an e-commerce brand, but what do you think the next big thing or things are for e-commerce brands that don't want to go down the traditional route of paid advertising, influencer marketing? Content marketing at scale is very hard. It's very time consuming. It takes time to see dividends. SEO is a long-term play. There's lots of long-term plays, definitely, especially for startups, but even for established brands, especially if they try to expand into new categories or take on new products, or they have to deal with seasonality, etc. There's almost innumerable challenges out there for e-commerce brands that are trying to expand and grow their business, especially as the economy continues to contract intentionally, which is what the central bank's trying to do. They're trying to cool off the economy and reduce inflation. But it feels like brands are fighting lots of headwinds all at the same time. So what do you see right now that's working super well? And what's on your radar that you think is going to be that next big thing, that next piece of low-hanging fruit, as you refer to it?
I've been talking, I'm in a couple of masterminds, and I think this year, like I said, is like doing less things but better. So if you have a lot of products in your inventory, it's probably dead weight and time to shed it. I've found a lot of people have a lot of success by streamlining and getting rid of most of their product suite and just going in on like the 1 or 2 or 3 bestsellers. Obviously, in terms of pricing, I love geeking out on this, but like how can you increase that lifetime customer value, like getting them to add to cart, and then how can you retain them on the back end with email marketing? So it's really not about getting more and more leads, but it's like, how do you keep a lead for longer? I think that's really how we can win in this economy.
And in terms of like getting their name out there and becoming more visible in their niche, apart from gift guides, what are like 1, 2, or 3 other key ways that you're seeing are absolute, like it's a given that it's going to be a winner for most brands?
Podcasts. So podcasts are great because it's long form storytelling. And when you get onto one podcast, it becomes a domino effect. Podcasts are great because not only is it closer to the selling cycle, if you're listening to someone for 30 minutes, much more likely to buy than just liking someone's reel. What I love about podcasts is that then you can we repurpose that one podcast into 20 pieces of content that then fills your social media pipeline. So it's all about leveraging your time to work smarter and not harder. I also think that speaking and awards, there's so many different awards categories and lots of local places that small businesses can speak on. A lot of times e-commerce thinks, I'm not a thought leader. And because they're only focused on their product. But if you zoom out, you probably are a thought leader in sustainability or children's education or whatever that is. And so if we just allow ourselves to really step into that frequency, we realize, oh my God, I'm building so much more than just this one product. And then you can start to take up those spaces, whether it's speaking, whether it's panels, whether it's your local chapter of your business organization. So I really challenge and invite product owners to think more broad other than just their lane. See how they can really get out there. And there's just so many ways to get visible that's beyond what's right in front of you.
And have you found any success for you or your clients on Reddit? Because for me personally, LinkedIn has become incredibly crowded, incredibly noisy, much more difficult now to get cut through. When I started doing hard out content on LinkedIn 8 years ago, it was significantly easier to grow your follower account. It was significantly easier to get your content seen. You didn't really have to pay to play. Now it's much more pay to play. Definitely LinkedIn has become just so challenging now compared to what it was even 1, 2, 3 years ago, that my ROI on my time spent on LinkedIn has dropped precipitously over the last couple of years, but my ROI on Reddit, which I only really started even thinking about around a year ago, I found that just answering questions in there, posting content there, being visible on there, also not being anonymous on Reddit for me has paid massive dividends. So I'm one of, I think there's only like 1% or something like that of Redditors that are not anonymous and sitting behind some sort of an alias. And for me, that's been actually really powerful. So I'll go in there, I'll try to answer all the e-commerce questions. I'll try to be really active in the subreddits related to my industry. I'll try to be as helpful as I possibly can. I'll try to post links to resources that aren't necessarily just my resources or my podcast, but other resources that people can take advantage of for free, that can help them build their business. And I found that to be super valuable for me in building my personal brand and just exposing people to my profile, to where if they like what I have to say and they like the fact that I've been helpful, they can just pop over to my profile and I've got my links in my profile to my podcast, etc., if they want to learn more. But there's no pressure to do that. And have you found other online niches like that aren't yet quite as insanely crowded as LinkedIn, as Instagram, as TikTok, as Facebook, etc.? What do you find from a digital channel perspective is working really right now that maybe you didn't even expect?
So I like Reddit, but I will say from my audience of female founders who are mainly moms, they're not as, from what I can hear, they're not as active on Reddit, but they do love Facebook groups and they do love Slack channels. So there's a lot of D2C, like beauty, CPG, like founders networks on a place like Circle, or there's another one, I forgot what it's called, but there's a lot of these mighty networks, a lot of these circles where you can join groups, and it's anywhere from 300 to 1,000, but I will say it's mid-size, it's not that big. And so women have, in my audience, have really loved it, being in part of those communities. I think for us, what we want is like something that's still intimate, where it doesn't seem like it's a crazy echo chamber like LinkedIn, because I absolutely agree with you. I think, raise your hand if you've gotten targeted by like a 4X scammer on LinkedIn, right? So I think it depends on your audience, but I will say for my audience of moms, like they're not using Reddit as much, but I do think that's very creative that you're able to leverage it, because I just love going on Reddit. I think it's so fun personally.
And what do you think about School, the School platform? Sam Ovens, Alex Hormoz is famously invested in it recently, and it seems like it's exploding with niche communities as well, at least as far as I can tell.
So I'm on School. I joined my business coach's AI membership on School, but I haven't used it for like my audience. So my audience of, like I said, CPG product owners who make like beauty, fragrance, I am not sure that they are using that as much. I think that if I were to guess, they probably would be on like a Facebook community, for example, or a Slack first. But School is definitely really interesting, and I'm on there.
Love it. Love it. Top 1, 2, 3 tips. Somebody's hearing this for the very first time, they love what you have to say, they love this idea of taking control and ownership of their brand, they want to take control of publicizing their brand, they want to take control of how their brand is positioned in the market, what their brand is saying, the people it's attracting, all that sort of stuff. Where would you suggest they start today if that's what they want to do?
Definitely watch my free PR masterclass. I show you exactly how to pitch and what it looks like from start to finish. You can access that right now at gloriachoupr.com/masterclass. But when we think about pitching, I think there's the mindset part that we need to deal with and then the tactical part. So the mindset of, I'm not big enough. I don't have a big following, or I don't have an influencer pushing my brand. Absolutely not true. There's journalists who are scouring the internet for featuring indie brands. So as long as you know that you deserve to be seen, then you can get that mindset out of the way. Because most of the people who are in my program, like, they don't have a big following at all. And journalists are not looking at your follower number because you can just buy a bunch of followers, right? Second thing is knowing how to pitch properly to journalists versus your customers. So we know how to sell, right? We know our benefits and features, but when you have to put on that hat of pitching to a journalist, it's leading with something that is different. So leading with, what is the seasonal trend? What is the relevance? So instead of leading with, oh, people love my sleep mask, it could be like leading with a third-party study about like sleep and why it's so important. So it's really about pitching not about your product, but around your product. Pitching with specificity and relevance is a third thing. I always think about pitching to journalists like peeling away the layer of an onion, right? So the first layer is very general. For example, oh, wellness tips for women. It's not really flavorful, not really interesting. But if you make that even more specific, so 2024 trends for wellness for postpartum women, you see how you just keep adding more and more layers of specificity? Same thing with pitching. So you might have a product. Let's say, give me an example. Let's say you make gloves, right? And you're like, this glove is really for outdoor people and it's really for skiing. But maybe when it's not ski season, you can still pitch it for something else, for like outdoor hiking. So it's really about pitching your product and adapting it to the season and being creative around that. So it's the same product that you're pitching, but you have to tell the journalist why it's relevant for that season. And that's how one product can keep getting featured over and over again. You don't have to keep reinventing the wheel or having new product launches.
Yeah, and I guess it feels like some of the most hip current brands haven't. I'm thinking of Liquid Death, for example. They have gotten so much earned media, free earned media, that they haven't paid for. They don't work with influencers. They don't pay for PR. They seem to have come out of nowhere. They seem to be everywhere, and they seem to not spend a lot of money on marketing. Maybe they do now, but at least when they started out, they didn't do a lot of paid marketing. This was guerrilla marketing in the beginning. And so do you oftentimes look at brands like that and say, wow, I think we can learn something from these brands that they seem to have exploded on the scene, become massive, haven't seemed to spend a lot on traditional marketing tactics and activities, but yet have found massive success anyway. Do you try to figure out ways we can adapt those large player ideas into small tactical actions we can take as starter brands?
I think the biggest mindset lesson from this whole Liquid Death thing is that even water is being reinvented and repackaged. So who are you to think that you don't have anything novel? I think for most founders, they're like, I'm not making anything new. And Liquid Death is just repackaging water. So I think if we can use that as a lesson to remind us that even though we're not doing anything groundbreakingly new, that we can still be successful, I think that's 90% of or 90% of the work right there.
Love it. Love it. Listen, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Now, as we come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you, let you ask me one question. Any question you like, can be personal or professional. So Gloria CHOU from Gloria CHOU PR, what is your question for me today?
So my question for you is, what is your favorite AI tool that's helping e-commerce people right now?
Oh, wow. Fantastic question. I can really only speak to what I'm using in my business on a daily basis. There's a couple of different tools I'm using on a daily basis, but the one that is wowing me right now and has just had a pricing change and is now making it available at scale to almost any brand, where as of even a couple of months ago, it was only available to the biggest brands because it was so expensive, is HeyGen. HeyGen. And I'm using it to translate all of my podcasts into Spanish. You can translate it into unlimited languages. It does voice match, face match, and lip match. So it literally looks like me and my guests are actually speaking in that language. It does the full translation, and it's an unlimited number of translation of videos per month for $69 a month. So for me, that's how I just in the last month have launched a Spanish language channel for my podcast. And now I put all of my completely edited videos through HeyGen, and it generates the Spanish version of that podcast. And now I have Spanish channels for my podcast. And I think that every brand can expand, and it also has AI avatars. So if you want to create a script and you want to have an AI avatar that creates videos for you at scale, you can do that through HeyGen as well. And it's also unlimited for that same $69 a month. Now, I did calculations last year on HeyGen. 3 episodes a week of 1 hour each. It was going to cost me about 20 grand a year for enough credits to do this. What now costs me $70, $69 a month. So to me, this is an AI tool that has just recently become accessible to mainstream because the cost of that technology has come down. And I think it can be very transformational for brands because they can create video content at scale. Even if they don't want to record it themselves, they can have an AI avatar of themselves. They can write the script themselves, and then they can have a fully AI generated video with the right background, with the right visuals, all that sort of stuff. So I think that this is, I'm using a lot of Gen AI tools to not only for my editing of my podcast, using Descript, for example, using Write Blogger to convert my full video podcast into a blog article that I then can embed the full length of video in the base of. So I'm using a lot of Gen AI tools right now to basically streamline processes that I was doing manually in my business to cut like my post-production time in half, or even less, actually, probably cut by 2/3. And so Gen AI for me is taking I could do and was doing myself and automating that process, but ending up with a very high quality result. And so for me, that's the winning tool right now is HeyGen and their new cheap pricing.
That's mind blowing. Thank you for that tip.
No worries. My absolute pleasure. Now, look, I will put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. I'll also put a link to your website in the show notes. Other than that, how do you like people to get a hold of you and have a chat? All things personal and brand PR.
So you can watch the PR masterclass because we didn't really talk about the CPR method. You can see exactly the proven framework that I've used that thousands of founders have used to get featured in places like Forbes, Oprah's Favorite Things, Wirecutter, New York Times, all of those things. You can watch it at gloriachoupr.com/masterclass. And you can find me on Instagram and say hi. And I'm at Gloria Chou PR. That's Gloria, CHOU PR.
Absolutely love it. I will absolutely send them your way. And what does CPR stand for, by the way? It's obviously not cardiopulmonary resuscitation.
It stands for credibility, point of view, and relevance.
Wow. Love the framework. Love what you're doing in the space and democratizing PR for everyone. Thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to speak to you again soon. If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.